Hello, this is Amber from Morgan James Publishing, and I have the pleasure today to chat with Dr. Mary J. Wardell, the author of Twice as Good: Leadership and Power for Women of Color. How are you doing today, Dr. Mary?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day here in California, Northern California, and there's just so many good things just to be focusing on right now.
I love it. I love it.
Mhm.
Keeping positive. Well, I want to dive right in and ask you a couple of questions about your book. So, first off, tell us why you wrote this book.
Thank you so much for that question, Amber. Yeah, I wrote the book Twice as Good as both a reflection, a leadership reflection on my journey as an executive woman of color in higher education specifically, but also in my work that I've done as a leadership professor and diversity and inclusion expert over the course of over 20 years, working with women, not only in my classroom, undergraduate and graduate classroom, but working with women in the workplace. And so what I did was that I felt like it was important for me to document not only my own experiences, but the experiences that I have learned in that both coaching and leadership work that I've been doing over the course of years around the explicit combination of gender and race as it relates to leadership, and that women of color right now are in a very remarkable place to step into leadership roles. And if there's a time that society needs kind of a wholehearted leadership approach, now would be the time.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about those leadership roles. What makes you think that women of color are ready to take those on?
Well, part of what happens in society when you kind of grow up, even as a child, and then move into adolescent years, and then you go on to college if you're able to, and then you enter the workforce, you find out that not all things are equal for all people at all times. And I guess we can say that is true for everyone that that does work. Yet there are some specific challenges as well as obstacles that not only women have had to progress and be able to move through and beyond, but it's even more so when you layer on and intersect the racial implications, particularly for African American, for Latinx, Latina, Hispanic women, Asian American women, and Indigenous Native American women. And so the research is well documented around how we have not fully been able to participate at the leadership tables at the mid-range level, and definitely at the senior executive level. The latest McKinsey report has proved that we haven't moved the needle with all of the efforts that we've done over the last 20 plus years, and the very small number of women that are leading Fortune 500 companies. And so one of the things that I know for sure, and what the research has also shows, is that when you have individuals that have challenges in their experiences, a lifelong set of challenges, the way that they approach problems oftentimes is that they are not looking not only for what is good for them, but they fundamentally are looking at what is good for the community. And so the solutions and the ways in which not only women, but specifically women of color approach difficult situations, long-held problems, things that are that others have not been able to move the needle on. There is this way of bringing our whole identities and our whole selves into that work that actually benefits the organization and the institution or the company. And it does it in a way that brings people in and inclusively brings people in. And women of color have a way of listening very carefully to the voices that are not only the ones that are the loudest, but the ones that are on the periphery. And in doing so, they also bring forward talent that is oftentimes invisible in organizations or on teams. And so by doing that, because they have those experiences themselves, and many times they've been invisible, and so you have to actually have walked in some challenging footprints in order to understand the challenges that others are having in organizations. And so this kind of wholehearted, inclusive approach to leadership is what they bring on every level of an organization, not just the senior level, cabinet level, or the senior executive team, but they're doing it at the mid-range, and they're actually doing it in entry-level positions as well. Once they have an opportunity to get some additional responsibilities, you start to see that they are solving problems in new and different ways that I think, as we know now, particularly during this time that we're living in, a kind of the time of a global pandemic, if there is a time for new approaches to leadership, if there is a time for inclusive approaches to leadership, if there was a time to think about the common good, we need to have more people who are able to do that. And and you can do that when you've actually been had some of those challenges yourself.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, it sounds like in your book you really highlight why women of color aren't just ready, but they are in a lot of ways more qualified to take on some of those challenging leadership positions. I love it.
You said exactly. That would be my, not only my hypothesis, but I believe it's the truth. I think they
Yeah,
are actually more than qualified.
yeah, I get that. I love it. It's so
Mhm.
powerful. So what should we do now to further your message?
Well, first of all, this interview is one of the ways that all of us can find ways to use our platforms. And so you're with Amber with Morgan James Publishing, my publishing company. How do you use this platform to be able to expand it? The same would go for anyone in any type of leadership role. And so because I'm a leadership professor I teach both in graduate schools of education as well as an MBA programs in the business schools. One of the things that I always tell my students is that whatever table that you're able to sit around, regardless of your position, and someday when you actually are sitting at that leadership table or that corporate board table where you're able to make policy decisions as it relates to equity and inclusivity, you need to be thinking about how do you ensure that there is a trajectory and a pathway to both not only promote, but to ensure that there is a woman of color sitting at those tables. So it might be the table that you're sitting at, or it might be a table that you have the ability to influence others that they get a chance to sit on. And so corporate board directors need to be paying attention to this message. Obviously, organization CEOs and corporate CEOs need to pay attention to this message, and the vice presidents and all those people that we like to call in the C-suite. But actually, anybody that has any influence, if you have an influence in a community leadership role, if you have an influence in the faith community, if you have influence in education and other communities, you need to identify where are the opportunities that you can use your platform to leverage and to share and to create space for a promising and high potential girl of color, adolescent young woman of color, or a young professional of color, or even more so an executive woman of color, someone that has been in the field for a while, has proved her worth, and yet has not quite been able to be placed in that key leadership task that can make all the difference, not only for the stakeholders in your organization, but then it impacts the field as well. I mean, there's a reason, Amber, that the voters in 2019, actually I guess would have been the end of 2018, elected the most female as well as the most diverse Congress in the history of that institution. And we know, Congress has been the ways in which, at least in the United States, that's how we've gone about ensuring a representative democracy from all the states. And that's how we've been able to move our legislation forward. So if you think about the institution of Congress and you start to think about why were so many women elected, and then even more so, why were so many women of color were elected? I think it had to do with the country was it dismayed with what they were seeing, the results that was not happening. And
Mm.
so I think that more organizations need to follow the example of what has happened in our congressional area, and see more women of color take on roles in corporate leadership,
Yeah.
as well as a lot of other areas of leadership in our country.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that you mentioned that regardless of what table you're sitting at, regardless of where you're at in
Mhm.
life, you still
Yeah.
have the opportunity to push this
Mhm.
message and to help each other out. Excellent,
Absolutely.
excellent.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mary, for joining me today.
Oh, thank you
Readers,
so much.
yeah, absolutely. Readers, if you'd like to pick up her book, Twice as Good, you can find it wherever books are sold. Love it.
Thank you. Yes, I'm really excited about this, and we're
Yeah,
getting
I'm
some
too.
good reviews. I really appreciate it when people actually write a review. But I also actually will get emails because my contact information is here, and people find me and say it was so, it really helped me be able to think about my next step. And
Yeah,
so
that is
that's
so
been
powerful.
so joyous for me to be able to get feedback from people that are feeling like that they feel like it's making a difference in their lives.
I love that. So before we sign off, can you tell readers where they can find you?
Well, they can find me. First of all, they can find my book wherever books are sold. So you can just do a search of Dr. Mary J. Wardell at Twice a Good, and you'll find my book. You can also find me. I have my leadership and diversity coaching firm it's called the DEI Leadership Group. DEI stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So you can reach me directly at Mary, Mary, at DEIleadershipgroup.com. And with that, I can be able to hear from you and be able to see what ways I might be able to support you in whatever goals that you might have.
Well, excellent. And thank you again for joining us. And congratulations on
Thank
the
you.
release of your book.
Thank you.